Hej och välkomna till Internationell författarscen. We are here to talk with the Icelandic poet and novelist Sjón, who is now publishing his impressive novel Codex 1962 in Swedish translation on Ramus förlag. It is a remarkable novel in 3 parts. I don't remember when I read such a rich novel last time. It's dense with ideas, allusions, digressions, absurd co-characters, storytelling, and utter sadness and high-speed comedy. The first 2 parts is translated by Anna Gunnarsdotter Grönberg, and the last by John Swedenmark. And by the way, if you have any doubts, I want to tell you, Sjón, that the translation is excellent. And when I quote from the book today, it may sound a bit strange because I have read it in Swedish and made my own very hasty translation into English. And this is a novel about a myriad of things, but in the center of the story is Golem, the Jewish folklore figure that is created from clay or mud. Sjón, you have said that you wanted to take the story of the golem to Iceland. Can you tell us something about how that happened?
Yes, it was a pledge, really. I was in Prague in the summer of 1990, a few months after the Velvet Revolution. I went there with the Sugarcubes, the Icelandic band that was conquering the world at the time, and they were, I think, the first band from outside to play a concert in the Czechoslovakia after the changes. So I went with them, and one day, actually after they had left, and I spent one more week there on my own, just to soak in the city, this amazing city of stories and fantastic literature throughout the centuries. And one day I went to the Jewish cemetery to visit the grave of Rabbi Löwe, the great rabbi who in the late 16th century served as a sort of protector of the ghetto. He was a scholar, a scientist, who was on speaking terms with Rudolf II, the emperor, who was also looking for wonders and knowledge. And one of the things that the rabbi is supposed to have done is to make this creature of clay, the golem, that served as a protector of the Jewish ghetto at the time. And there are many different stories about the golem, but it is a story that has survived and has become an integrated part of Prague and the tapestry of stories in Prague. And I had read the novel The Golem by Gustav Meyrink some years earlier, and I thought I should pay a respect to the rabbi, the creator of the creature. And when I came to the Jewish cemetery in the Josefstadt ghetto, Josefov ghetto, I realized that people were actually making wishes and asking requests of the rabbi, because on his grave there were like little stones and pieces of paper where people had written like their wishes, their desires, or the problems they had, in hope that the rabbi would somehow solve them. And I thought, well, I will do this too. This is what you do here. And I wrote a little message to the rabbi, told him that I had a problem in my private life that needed to be solved, and I put it on the grave, and then I put a stone on the paper. And then, because I'm a very well brought up and well behaved boy, I thought, well, I cannot just ask something of him. I have to offer something instead. And right there on the spot, I thought, if you solve my problem, I will bring your golem to Iceland. I will make the golem a part of the tapestry of stories in Iceland.
It was a treat, yes.
Yes. And obviously, the rabbi, having connections on a universal scale. He solved my tiny problem like this, and I was left with fulfilling
hard work,
fulfilling my promise. And, you know, I started thinking about this, and in 1994, I published the first book. And the first book starts the journey of the golem to Iceland. And then, for many reasons, it took me almost 25 years from the moment I stood by the grave until I had finished the journey. And Codex was born.
I mean, it's the Codex 1962 is made of 3 sections: a love story, a crime novel, and a science fiction story. And I mean, to be published under such a long time span, did you know from the start that it would be in 3 parts, or did you sort of discover that on the way?
I realized when I was writing the first book that it would not be enough for this story.
Oh.
And I realized that book had to be about the making of the golem and getting it ready to be transported to Iceland. And then, of course, you know, a trilogy, you know, became the obvious choice. Mm. And it also had to do with the fact that I realized that a good story about a creature that somehow comes, or not somehow, just that comes from the Jewish mythology, and to us via the Bible, you know, it continues. The New Testament and all of that, you know, I discovered that I could give this the form of a story about the mother, the father, and the son.
Yes, yes.
So the first book became about the mother. She's the main character there. The father is the main character of the second book, and then the narrator, who is the son, tries to make the third book about himself. But yes, because of the wealth of stories and the endless digressions, he realizes that he will never tell his own story properly.
I mean, even though it's written during 25 years, almost 3 decades, it has its own cohesive logic, I think, a logic that it took me a while, quite a lot of pages before I understood. First, I thought of the imagination, the phantasmagoria, the richness of ideas. And then I understood that sort of behind all this inventiveness, there is extreme work and research, intertextual allusions and echoes from I don't know how many sources. I mean, many of the things that the reader, at least in the beginning, I think, thinks that you have made up is in fact based on other sources. Can you sort of describe this work and the difference between inventing and finding? If you understand what I mean.
Yes.
I mean, inventing poetic material and finding it.
Yes, I think it comes from, I think it is very difficult to be an Icelandic author who is not on a fundamental level influenced by the saga tradition and the tradition of medieval writing. And so much of what the medieval writers were doing here, when they were writing the sagas, when they were writing the stories of the Norwegian kings, when they were writing their stories about the making of the world and all of that, was rewriting, was accumulating material, rewriting it, and putting it into a context that made sense for people living on this rock here up in the north at the time. So it came very naturally to me when I realized that there was a narrator that would be behind all of this material, that there is a narrator who is trying to get grasp of his own place in the universe, we can say, and that the only thing that he has to do it, to make sense of himself and his own fate, is stories. And as a man who doesn't have that many stories himself, in the end we discover this is a man living in contemporary Reykjavik. He's afflicted with a rare genetic disease. He has never lived anything remotely exciting in his life. So to give his story a meaning, he starts. What do you say? He starts using everything that he has heard, everything that he can put his finger on, and bringing it into this web. And much of it is stuff that he has discovered. And he just puts it in with the things that he imagines, and he recontextualizes all this stuff, So there is a rewriting of the first paragraph of Kafka's Metamorphosis, There is endless repurposing of material. And this is how the mind works, I think. This is how the mind works, We are just dealing all the time with all the stories that we've heard, and we're trying to make sense of them, and we're using them to make sense of ourselves. And then it's also a game of literature.
Yes. I came to think of, it's really hard to say what is the topic of what is it about? What is the topic? And one way to see it, at least I started to think of it at a certain point. It was that I think that the storytelling itself is sort of the topic, perhaps the topic, and it's an experiment with different ways of telling a story. Different literary forms, theater, poetry, dialogues, classic, epic writing. Tolstoy's almost. And of course, the saga. What is the story for you? Why is it? Why have you written something about a story? It's some kind of meta book in that sense, I think.
Yeah, it is really what you're describing. It is a long love letter to the storytelling nature of man. We don't know if other animals have means of sharing experiences. We don't know, because we don't know their language, and we don't know the depth of their communication. And we don't realize how complex it most likely is. But at least we know that the human being is obsessed with stories, and it seems to be one of the fundamental tools of human culture. So the main character in the book realizes that against the huge forces that every human being faces, huge and small, let's say, forces that we face, but especially the large forces that seem to be overpowering, like tyranny or even just death. The only thing we have is telling stories, is speaking back to our existence. And the poor guy is completely at the mercy of the storyteller's oldest fear, and that is losing the attention of the listener or the reader. And he uses the oldest trick in the book, which is or the oldest trick of the marketplace, where the storyteller sits and starts feeling that, this guy is leaving, and then he says, the prince sat down and fell asleep against the tree.
Yeah.
While he was asleep, 3 robbers came into the clearing. So all of a sudden, we have a good story about robbers, and we have like some chase in the woods and maybe a speaking bird that saves the prince. And then we continue with the story that we were going to tell. But the danger is that, of course, we could have forgotten the story we were going to tell in the excitement of the digression. So it's really also an example of how one story always opens up into another story. And the universe is connected by these endless points that have endless connections. Every point in the universe is connected to every other point in the universe, sometimes by digression, but we will always get there. So that's why the book just like gives into this. Yeah.
I have a friend who is a teacher, and one day he was in kindergarten and telling stories to 5-year-old kids, and then he was telling a story about a rabbit and some fairies, and he had this little doll at each finger, and talking about this he was inventing a story. And then one of the children raised her hand and asked, "Is this your job?" And one sort of asked the same question to the writer. I mean, what a fantastic job it is, sort of just to stand there and I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe this little girl realized that actually, yes, there are people in this world who have the job of telling stories, and it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful observation.
Yeah, it is. Yes, it is. I think of the book is often, in a way, self-explanatory and commenting itself, commenting how it works. I mean, for example, Josef Löwe says about his father, and I quote, "He claimed that he in himself was nothing but the sum of everything he had experienced in his life." End of quote. And we could read that as a statement about the book also. And in this way, the book is often reflecting on itself. Can you say something about how you work with that and this meta language?
I think it just came naturally out of this out of my working with storytelling itself, because a storyteller would naturally pause and say, well, you might think the story is going in a strange direction now, but let me tell you, it will get stranger. Something like that. It's a part of the dynamics between the storyteller and the audience.
Oh.
So I really do not see it as a postmodern metafictional trick. Yeah. I see it as a return to the basic rules of storytelling. Yeah. And I must say that the first book of Codex, 1962, I consider my first successful novel. It's the first novel where I really felt comfortable with what I was doing. And it was because I discovered a voice. I discovered that I could write a contemporary novel that had a voice. Because the voice of the storyteller is something that we always associate with past literature, even 19th century literature. It's something that goes out of literature when it becomes so cerebral, philosophical, clever, clever in intellectual, let's say. So this element of just hearing a voice and having a voice and combining it with everything that I had read and loved in literature up till that point, which is also books that have the nature I was describing, are intellectual, are definitely about the text being a text on the page and all of that. I discovered that the voice could bring all that as well.
I mean, it is an intellectual book, but it's absolutely not, just an intellectual book. You get sucked in the story, and perhaps we had said too little about the plot in a way. Can you describe in perhaps a difficult task, but anyway, can you describe in some kind of manner the plot in the three parts?
Well, it's
the main plot, sort of.
It's so difficult to summarize the book. I actually
that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, I saw somewhere on the internet there was a reviewer. I can't remember if it was in the States or in the UK, who admirably managed to summarize it in 2 paragraphs, and I was like, I will have to copy and paste this, and always use it, but I've forgotten it now. I mean, the basic plot is very simple. A Jewish man escaping the Holocaust.
Holocaust, yes.
Manages to bring with him a piece of clay from the original golem of Prague. The piece of clay is lifeless. Life has not been breathed into it. And on his way, he is sheltered or hidden away in a small guest house in northern Germany for a few nights. And there he meets the maid of the guest house, Marie-Sophie, and at the end of the book, they bring life to the golem. But he must leave, and he leaves for Iceland, and the world that he came from is destroyed. It's a world you can never return to. It becomes a sort of a sleeping frozen land. But he goes to Iceland, and on his way to Iceland, he meets on the ship twins who are sportsmen and Nazis, and they managed to steal from him his ring, his signet ring, which is necessary to bring life to the child again, because the child lies dormant in a hatbox on the way to Iceland. The second book is about the father, Leo Löwe, trying to reclaim the gold from the ring so he can bring his son back to life. And there he finds himself at the mercy of the self-important, newly born Icelandic Republic. He comes to Iceland the day after Iceland gets its independence from Denmark. He comes to Iceland on the 18th of June, 1944. And he has to spend the next what is it? 14, 15, 16 years trying to reclaim this gold from the twins. One twin becomes a stamp salesman, and the other is a guard at the parliament. And they have werewolf genes. He has to fight one of them as a werewolf. And to assist him, there are 2 men, a Russian spy and an African-American scholar of theology. At the end of the book, he manages to bring life to the child. And in the third book, the child starts telling his own story, but is completely unable to do it because he's just crumbling under the burden of the world that he has created in the first 2 books. And there we slowly start getting the story of his generation in Iceland, people born in 1962, the same year that he's given life, and how they are, from the minute they enter this world, at the mercy of death, and they start exiting. And he is actually fighting against time and trying to finish his story before he is forced to leave. But, another strand of the story of a genealogist who is harvesting the Icelandic genome with megalomaniac ideas about the importance of Icelanders in this world. And for a man like Josef Löwe, comes from a Jewish culture, to all of a sudden be trapped, like his father, in this country that is completely obsessed with the purity of its genes, behaving as if the tragedy of the Holocaust and the horror of the racial laws never existed. He's speaking against this, the whole book as well. And the book, in a way, is a big attack on the Icelandic self-identity.
What an admirable explanation of the plot. Very well. I mean, in part 3 really sort of wraps the trilogy in, at least for me, quite an unsuspected way, but nevertheless entirely logic way, with this biotechnological theme that, I mean, of course, also the golem story is a sci-fi story, and the mystery with what should you call it? The sort of the life matter. Sort of what is the life matter? What brings life? Of course, it has to do something with the DNA. I also thought about the lists. I mean, one way of your storytelling is making different listing. And I came to think of the Japanese classic, The Pillow Book by, say, Sjón with her beautiful lists. And in this book, it's a list. I mean, it's a billion of different lists. The nightly dreams of the citizens of Kukenstadt, the people's life stories at an AA meeting, for example, and of course this fascinating list of births and deaths of people that were born in 1962, la danse macabre, so to speak, the death dance, the dance in the last chapter. Can you tell us something about, I mean, your work with the listing in general, and especially I would like to hear something about how you worked on this list of people born in 1962, which, by the way, of course, is the same year that you yourself were born.
Well, lists are such a fascinating thing on their own, because a list always starts generating connections within itself, and you only have to look around and note down things around you, and when you read it out loud, they start making some sort of sense and story, even though they are completely unrelated. There is an exercise proposed by William S. Burroughs in, I think, The Adding Machine, his book of essays, where he says that he learned from spies, because he was always like boasting about having even been a spy himself, and like this world of secret networks and knowledge.
The paranoiac world. Yeah.
The paranoiac world. And he said one of the things that he learned from a spy in Morocco, I think, was that when you are following someone and you don't want to lose that person in a crowd or whatever, then you focus on the color, one color in the person's clothes. And if you focus, let's say, on green, then you focus only on the color green, and you only start seeing the color green in the environment. Yeah. And all of a sudden, the environment becomes a network of things that are green. Yeah. And I've made this exercise with students in the few writing workshops that I've done.
Yes.
So I've sent them out, and they've come back with lists of everything yellow they saw maybe on a 15-minute walk. And then we take out the word yellow, and they just read the list of things, and it always becomes poetry.
Yes.
All of a sudden, these things start speaking together and creating a sense of start creating a sense and exposing like their hidden relationships, that go beyond the color. So I love lists. That's the only thing I can say. I love the music they make, and in this book that is, of course, the whole time pretending to find meaning, pretending to use science, the science of literature to create that meaning. Lists were so necessary. And then when I started working on the list of people born in 1962 who have died before Josef, I used mainly a tool that the genealogical company Decode in Iceland gave Icelanders as a present when they had harvested our genes and sold them to multinational pharmaceutical companies. They gave us this little thing, which is a list of every Icelander ever born, and you can find your family tree.
Wow.
You can go online, you can register, and then you can look at your family tree. And I realized this was a tool to look at everyone born in my age group. I had to use tricks because you're not supposed to use it like I did. But I realized I could make search strings that brought this information to me. And when I had a list of everyone who had been born and died in Iceland before, I think I started making the list in maybe around 2002, 2003. And then, of course, it just started growing until 2012 when Josef dies. I had this list. I had the dates of death. And I did a research in Icelandic newspapers. And I managed to dig out, I would say, in 90% of the cases, I managed to dig out the cause of death.
Okay.
That was important for me because in a way that started making its own strange, dance, macabre music. So I really, and I became so afraid of dying myself before I could finish the book because the list became so haunting. Of course, I knew some of the people on the list, I knew some of the people.
Of course, they are born the same year as you.
They're born in the same year. There's a kid that drowns when he's 8, and he was in my school. There was another one who drowned at sea when we were 15, and I knew this guy very well. And then it just continued. Yeah. And, So
all these little sort of descriptions of people's lives and micro, what is the word? Obituaries.
Yes.
Or sort of they are people who have lived.
Yeah, and this is an attempt. Let's say this is an attempt to see if your cause of death gives a meaning to your life, which of course it doesn't. Death is always miserable. Death is always banal. Some deaths are strange. Some deaths are very common. But in the end, it is always banal. At the same time, it's a tragedy. Yeah. Everyday tragedies,
Another quote. Yes, they all wanted to be poets and men with ability to act. They wanted to reclaim the old word a Tafnaskald, sorry for my Icelandic, whose meaning was embodied by Snorri Sturluson and Einar Benediktsson, a spirit of entrepreneurs and literature, to be in the front line, having top jobs, make victories abroad, have conversations with prominent statesmen. End of quote. I mean, a Tafnaskald, if I understand right, means poet of enterprise, poet of action, handlingens poet. I mean, it's certainly a long way from the image of the poet as a weak and sensible soul. Isn't this quote also some kind of meta-poetic statement of this book? This is a book with ambitions that wants to do something. It's a tour de force. It wants to describe. I mean, it wants to describe the whole 19th century in a way.
Yeah, you know, athafnaskald is a term here in Iceland, and it is mostly used about these people, Snorri Sturluson, Einar Benediktsson, and poets who were also politicians, who were also entrepreneurs, and involved, you know, in the politics and major events of their times and all of that. I would say that the difference between me and the man speaking there, the genealogist,
yes,
is that for athafnaskald, poetry is never enough. You know, it is really people who are misunderstanding that poetry should always be enough. Poetry on its own is a major force.
Yes.
And you can do it in absolute quiet, and nobody even sees you, you know, apart from what they can see on the page of the slim volume of poetry that you deliver out of the forest every 7 years, you know. Yeah. So athafnaskald is in a way a misunderstanding of what poetry is. And
yes,
I think the book shows that one of the beauties of poetry and storytelling is that it always fails because the story can never be finished. While the athafnaskald, the poet of enterprise, always believes he can bring something to an end, bring something to a close with force.
Yes.
You know, so, yeah. And, you know, he tries to become a poet. And he is of the generation that was really behind the changes in Icelandic society that led to the financial crash and led to the disruption in the social contract that was made here after the war about Iceland becoming a welfare state. This is the generation that went against that, brought neoliberalism into our society, and really are the people that I see as the as the enemies of what I think is good and proper in the world, let's say. Yeah. So that's why he gives up being a poet and he becomes a scientist, and he's hoping to get a Nobel Prize for his science to show Icelanders that it's not only through writing and poetry that you can get the Nobel Prize as an Icelander. Yeah. So he is really dissing storytelling. I think.
Yes. I mean, you yourself is also in the novel. Your name and a line from your poetry is there. First, and your name also, Sjón, is short for Sigurjón Birgir Sigurdsson, and it means, of course, sight and vision, and it's the same word as the Swedish syn. And your first book was with a collection of poetry, syner also. Could you be described as a poet of the eye? Isn't it something hallucinatory or dreamy over the at least this book? And first that, and then if you can comment something about your own name in the book.
Well, yeah, I show up in the book because I am born actually on the same date and on the same minute as the storyteller of the book. So we are contemporaries, and the possibilities that we would meet in real life, they would have been very big had Josef existed outside the book. Oh. And I have the privilege of projecting myself into the book and making myself a part of Josef's story, and not in the most flattering way, really, because I plagiarize his witty remark to the young surrealist poet. And maybe there I am admitting my guilt as the writer of Codex 1962, which is a book made up of texts by others so much, that, I'm actually, admitting guilt there. And also it was very important for me that at the very end, when Josef joins the chorus of the dead, that he reminds me that I will one day join him, Yes. And we can ask ourselves, who has a better afterlife, the writer or the character?
Yes.
It's possible that the character will enjoy a more lively afterlife than the author ever will do.
It may certainly do. Yeah.
So, but the name, yes, I published my first book at the age of 15, the summer I turned 16, 1978. At the same time, I started writing poetry. I was also very occupied with drawing and making pictures, and really believed that I would become a visual artist, maybe more than a poet or a writer. And then I discovered that poetry is really visual art, and the name Sjón fit both directions. Mm-hmm. And I think, I'm not making this up, I thought as a 15-year-old, the poet is the eyes of the world. Yeah. Of course, forgetting all the great blind poets, but the blind poets might be the strongest seers. Yeah. And of course, there is a message in both Homer's blindness and Odin sacrificing one eye for the gift of poetry, because you have to have the inner vision to be able to be a poet. So, I really think I thought the poet is the eyes of the world when I was 15, and I thought that is my mission. So I have always worked with the visual in my writing, both poetry and prose. And again, I think this comes back to storytelling. A storyteller cannot only string dry lines of prose. A storyteller is a creator of images, and vision. So, yeah, I admit to being a visual artist.
Yes.
In my writing, yeah.
We should stop now. It has been a pleasure and a privilege to talk to you.
Well, the same here.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, bye to Reykjavik, Sjón. Thank you.
Bye to Gothenburg. Göteborg,
Göteborg,
as we say. Yeah.
Yes.